Hey, brothers. This is the beginning of the dreaded quadratic formula. Okay, so this quadratic formula, right? It all comes from what we just talked about, completing the square. That's the way that that we derive this, and it's kind of an easier way, just a shortcut because we don't want to complete the square every time. So we have this formula that we could just memorize and use all the time. Okay, so if you want to always complete the square, you can, but this is just an easier way to do it to make that quicker. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to derive the quadratic formula from the quadratic equation and completing the square. I'm doing that just to intimidate you. Not really. I'm just going to show you where it comes from. If you aren't interested in that, then obviously fast forward and move on to just the examples, because all you really have to do is memorize that formula. Okay, now where this comes from, completing the square. Okay, so we got to get rid of the c and we got to get rid of the a so we can then complete the square. We're going to do this all with variables. All right, so we need to subtract c over and then divide everything by a. So I'm going to have x squared plus b over ax, right, because I divided everything by a, leave a space to complete the square, equals negative c over a. Alright, now I need to complete the square by cutting this number in half, right? And if I cut this number in half, all I'm going to do is multiply by 1/2. Okay, so it's going to be b over 2a, right? This b over a cut in half is b over 2a. And then I need to square that. So what I'm adding to both sides is plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, because b over 2a squared is b squared over 4a squared. I'm going to add this to the, oops, that's not correct at all in the slightest. Okay, I'm going to add this to the right side. And now we've completed the square. So since we completed the square, we can rewrite this left side as x plus b over 2a, quantity squared. And this right side, we need a common denominator, which luckily, back in chapter 5, we learned how to do common denominators with these variables. We need this to be a 4a squared, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the top and bottom of this by 4a, right? 4a over 4a to get a 4a squared. So I'm going to change this denominator to 4a squared, and this top is going to be a 4ac. You might see some resemblances to the quadratic formula at this point. Okay, so when I combine this left side, or this right side, I have negative 4ac plus b squared all over 4a squared. Okay, now I could take the square root of both sides. These cancel out. X plus b over 2a. And on the right side, I split the top and bottom. Okay, I'm going to write the b squared first. It should be plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over the square root of 4a squared is just going to be 2a. Okay, now I subtract over what we got, and x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so that's completing the square for any numbers a, b, and c. Now we rewrite that, since they have a common denominator, as this quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus b squared, or the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's where it comes from. All you have to do is memorize it and use it. Okay, so we're going to solve these equations. Right? You can, once again, like I said, you can obviously check to see if you can factor first, because that's the easiest way to do this. We can't factor this one. There's no way to multiply to, oh, there is actually, I just made that up. So you can't factor. So, I mean, you could solve this by any of these methods: factoring, completing the square, or quadratic formula. Obviously, you could use the quadratic formula for this, and you're just going to get good answers, but since we can factor, let's just factor. There's no reason to actually use the quadratic formula there. Okay, so we'll factor this: x minus 7, x plus 2. Now I feel like an idiot for saying you can't factor it. So x equals 7 or 2, negative 2. Right? If you did that by completing the square or by quadratic formula, you'd actually get the exact same answers. Let's do more examples. Always check to see if you can factor. It's gonna save you all kinds of time. Can we factor this? 2 and 1 with 5. We have 5. We're gonna have. There's no way to do it. Positive on this one. No way to do it. Okay, so we could complete the square. Or instead of completing the square and having to deal with brutal fractions, I'm just going to use the quadratic formula, which I need to remember is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so we've got an a, a b, and a c. Remember, you got to take the sign to the left of our numbers to for our equation here. Okay, so x equals negative b, so negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared is 16 minus 4 times 5 for a times c, negative 2, all over 2 times a, which is 10. Okay, so now we just got to simplify as much as we can. X equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus, we've got plus 40 is root 56. Okay, 16 plus 40 is 56 all over 10. All right, you got to check to see if you can pull out anything. We actually can pull out a 2, so this is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 14, because 14 times 4 is 56, over 10. Now I can take a 2, reduce a 2 out of everything, so this becomes a 5, that becomes a 1, that becomes a 2. So our final answer is going to be negative 2 plus or minus root 14 all over 5. Those are our two answers for that one. Okay, number 3, we're going to work the same exact way. We've got our a, got our b, got our c. So x equals negative 5, so positive 5, plus or minus the square root of 25 for b squared, minus 4 times 3, all over 2 times a is 8. So we need to simplify under our radical, and we'll have x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 16 times 3 is 48. 25 minus 48 is going to be negative 23 over 8. Okay. Now the only thing that we can do here, we can't simplify 23 because it's prime, right? But we could take out our negative. We have to take out our negatives. Okay, so rewrite this as 5 plus or minus I root 23 over 8. Those are our two answers. All right, now number 4 here, all that's different is we have to manipulate this equation really quickly to make it look like ax squared plus bx plus c, so 5t squared plus 12t plus 8 equals 0. Okay, now we're to a place where we can try to factor. The factoring here is definitely not going to work, so we can just go straight to the quadratic formula. Do this in green. Okay, we've got an a and a b and a c. So we've got x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of 144 minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, so x is going to be equal to negative 12 plus or minus, let's simplify the radical, 144 minus 40 times 4 is 160, so negative 16 all over 10. Okay, so you can rewrite this as negative 12 plus or minus 4i over 10. And simplify what we've got, so 5 to 6. So we have negative 6 plus or minus 2i over 5. Those are our two answers to solve that equation. And lastly, how to turn this into some applications. Okay, so we have volume of a rectangular jewelry box, 4 centimeters in height is 136, and the perimeter of the base is 24. We're going to find the dimensions of that base. Okay, so we've got a rectangular jewelry box. Let me draw it. Okay, so that's what the jewelry box looks like. We've got this height. Okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm looking from the top. Actually, let's just do it this way. Right, the height is 4. Right, we don't know the width and we don't know the length. All right, but we know that the volume. Remember, the volume of something like this is length times width times height. Okay, and the perimeter of this whole thing is 24. Now the perimeter of that, the way you would find that, is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. Okay, so we've got these two equations. We've got to figure out what unknowns we have. Okay, because we have some of the stuff. For this top one, we have the volume is 136, and we have the height, 4LW. Okay, we don't have the length or the width. Well, it looks like we're going to have a system of equations, two equations, two unknowns. Okay, so the perimeter is 24, and this one, once again, we have two equations, or we have two unknowns in our equation. So we have a system here. Right, now, you can solve this. Right, but in order to solve it, we're going to have to do some substitution, because elimination is just not going to work. So let's go and do some substitution. I would say probably want to solve for one of these two. Okay, let's solve for L. In order to solve for L, we're going to have 2L equals 24 minus 2W. Oh, it should be a 2W. Divide everything by 2, so L equals 12 minus W. Okay, so you could take this, plug it in up here for this L, the other L. So we have 136, I'm going to do this in red, 136 equals 4 times 12 minus W times W. Okay, so we have to distribute all this stuff in here. The 4 and the W need to get distributed in there. That's actually really confusing. There's no reason for it to look that confusing. I could just write this as 4W times 12 minus W. Okay, now we're just distributing the 4W in here. Okay, so 136 equals 48W minus 4W squared. And you see there here that we have a quadratic equation. So you can always check to see what we can do with this. Right? We can divide everything by 2 for sure, and then get everything to one side of the equation. So I'm going to rewrite this up here as 2W squared after I pull the 2W over minus 24W after I pull the 24W over plus 136 divided by 2 should be 68. Oh, I could do the whole 4. 68 equals 0. I can still divide everything by 2 here. So W squared minus 12W plus 34 equals 0. Okay, factor it if you can. Well, you can't. So W is going to be equal to, we got the quadratic formula here. So negative B, 12 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A is 1 times C is 34 all over 2A, which is just 2. Okay, so W is going to be equal to 12 plus or minus square root of, we've got 144 minus 136, because 4 times 34 is 136. So 144 minus 136 is going to be 8. Square root of 8 we know is 2 root 2 all over 2. And you can simplify all this stuff. 1, 1, and 6. So it's equal to 2, or 6 plus or minus the square root of 2 all over 1. Those are the final answers. Okay, so to find the dimensions of the base, so it's going to tell us, that tells us the width, and then we can find the base from there. So you guys can finish that one up on your own.